Keanu Reeves, the man who's dodged bullets on screen and won hearts off it, was about to step into the most jaw-dropping, outrageous showdown of his life. A night so wild, so utterly insane, that it would leave the world buzzing with shock and awe. Picture this: a humble hero pouring his soul into a cause he cherishes, only to have it spat on, literally, by an arrogant tech titan dripping with wealth and disdain. What happened next was nothing short of the greatest, most savage twist ever witnessed. A moment so explosive it obliterated egos and rewrote reputations in an instant. This wasn't just a fundraiser gone wrong. It was a clash of titans, a storm of controversy, and an emotional roller coaster that hooked everyone who saw it unfold. How did Keanu turn the tables? What incredible move left the crowd gasping and the internet ablaze? Buckle up, because this tale is about to take you deep into a night that started with hope and ended with a reckoning no one saw coming. This isn't just a story, it's a revelation. And if you want to see how far it goes, subscribe now before it disappears. The evening began under a sky painted with the soft hues of twilight, the kind of night that promised something extraordinary. The grand ballroom of the Beverly Hills Hotel shimmered like a jewel, its towering glass doors reflecting the golden glow of chandeliers that hung like constellations above. Inside, the air buzzed with anticipation, a symphony of clinking glasses, rustling silk gowns, and the faint hum of a string quartet weaving melodies through the crowd. White roses adorned every table, their petals catching the light, while flickering candles cast dancing shadows across the pristine linen. This wasn't just any event. It was a fundraiser for the homeless, a cause that pulsed through the veins of its champion, Keanu Reeves, with a passion that could move mountains. Keanu moved through the room like a quiet storm, his presence both commanding and serene. Dressed in a simple black suit, no tie, no pretense, he was a stark contrast to the glittering attendees in their designer labels and diamond-encrusted accessories. His dark hair fell slightly over his forehead, framing those soulful eyes that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 untold stories. He wasn't here to bask in the spotlight, though the cameras adored him. No, Keanu was here to work, to fight for something bigger than himself. He stopped by a table where volunteers were arranging pamphlets, his hands steady as he helped stack them, his voice low and warm as he thanked each person by name. "This means everything," he'd murmured to himself, though no one heard it over the din. His heart was in this, every beat of it, and you could feel it in the way he carried himself, a man who'd known loss and kindness in equal measure. The ballroom was alive with purpose. On one wall, a massive screen looped images of the charity's successes: shelters built, meals served, lives reclaimed from the streets. A silent auction sprawled across another corner, offering everything from signed movie posters to a weekend at a Malibu beach house, all to raise funds for those who had nothing. Keanu paused to listen to Maria, a woman with weathered hands and a smile that defied her years on the streets. She told him about the night she'd found warmth in one of the shelters he'd helped fund, how it had been the first time in months she'd slept without fear. Keanu's eyes softened, a flicker of pride mingling with resolve. He placed a hand on her shoulder, a silent promise that this night would mean more for people like her. The crowd was a mix of Hollywood elite, philanthropists, and a handful of everyday folks who'd scraped together donations to be part of something meaningful. A journalist from a local paper scribbled notes near the bar, her eyes darting to Keanu every few seconds, sensing a story in the air. The energy was electric, a collective hope that tonight would mark a turning point. Keanu felt it too, a swell of possibility that made his chest tighten with determination. He glanced at the stage, a sleek platform with a podium where he'd soon speak, his words already forming in his mind. A call to action, a plea for compassion, a vision of a world where no one was left behind. But beneath the elegance and goodwill there was something else, a whisper of unease that Keanu couldn't quite place. Maybe it was the way the hotel staff moved a little too quickly, their smiles a touch too tight. Or perhaps it was the faint hum of a storm brewing beyond the glass walls, the kind of tension that lingers before chaos breaks loose. He shook it off, chalking it up to nerves. After all, this was his night to shine, not as an actor but as a man who believed in second chances. He made his way toward the stage, his steps measured, his mind focused on the speech that would rally this room to action. The clock struck 8 and the lights dimmed slightly, signaling the start of the main event. Keanu climbed the 3 steps to the stage, his boots silent against the polished wood. He adjusted the microphone, his fingers brushing the cool metal, and took a deep breath. The crowd hushed, their faces turning toward him like flowers to the sun. He began to speak, his voice steady and rich, filling the room with a warmth that drew everyone in. He talked about the streets he'd seen, the people he'd met, the quiet strength of those who'd lost everything yet still held onto hope. The words flowed like a river, smooth and powerful, each one landing with purpose. But just as he reached the heart of his message, just as he painted a picture of a future worth fighting for, the double doors at the back of the ballroom burst open with a force that shattered the moment. Heads turned, gasps rippled through the crowd, and Keanu's voice faltered for the briefest of seconds. A figure stormed in, uninvited and unapologetic, his presence a thunderclap in the stillness. This wasn't part of the plan. This wasn't supposed to happen. And yet, as Keanu's eyes locked onto the intruder, he knew one thing for certain. The night he'd poured his soul into was about to take a turn that no one could have predicted. The echo of the slamming doors lingered in the ballroom, a haunting reverberation that seemed to pulse in time with Keanu's heartbeat. He stood rooted to the spot, the torn halves of Voss's $1 million check still clutched in his hand, their jagged edges pressing into his palm. The applause from the crowd washed over him like a tide, swelling and crashing with a fervor that drowned out the last traces of Voss's venomous exit. Faces glowed with admiration. Volunteers, donors, even the skeptical celebrities Voss had mocked, united in a shared defiance that felt electric, almost tangible. Yet beneath the roar of support, Keanu sensed a shadow creeping in, an unshakable feeling that this victory was temporary, a fleeting calm before a greater tempest. Lena Harper lingered near the edge of the room, her notebook now a flurry of ink-stained scribbles, each word capturing the raw energy of the moment. Her dark hair fell across her face as she wrote, her sharp hazel eyes darting between Keanu and the crowd. She'd come expecting a routine story. Hollywood star hosts fundraiser, cue the photo ops, but this was something else entirely. This was a collision of ideals, a public unmasking of power and pride, and she could feel the weight of it settling into her bones. Her instincts screamed that Voss's retreat was no surrender. Men like him didn't bow out. They regrouped, recalculated, struck harder. She needed to get closer to peel back the layers of this unfolding drama, but for now she watched, her breath catching as Keanu finally moved. He let the torn check fall to the floor, the pieces fluttering down like broken wings, and stepped back toward the podium. His movements were slow, deliberate, as if each step carried the weight of the choice he'd just made. The crowd quieted, their applause fading into an expectant hush. Keanu's hands rested on the podium once more, his fingers tracing the grain of the wood, grounding himself in its solidity. His dark eyes swept the room, taking in the sea of faces, some tear-streaked, others resolute, and for a moment he felt the enormity of what he'd ignited. This wasn't just about the fundraiser anymore. It was a stand, a line drawn in the sand against apathy and arrogance. But lines, he knew, invited challenges. Outside, the night pressed against the ballroom's towering windows, a canvas of black pierced by the distant glow of city lights. The air inside grew heavy, thick with the scent of spilled champagne and wilting flowers, a reminder of the evening's fractured elegance. Maria, the volunteer who'd clung to her pamphlet like a lifeline, edged closer to the stage, her thin frame trembling with a mix of awe and fear. She'd seen Keanu as a beacon, a quiet force of good, but now she saw the storm he'd stirred and it left her breathless. Lena noticed her too, jotting a quick note, woman in gray, nervous, key witness, her mind already weaving Maria into the narrative she'd craft. Keanu lifted his gaze, his voice rising to fill the silence. He didn't shout, he didn't need to. His words carried a quiet strength, a steady rhythm that pulled the room back from the brink of chaos. He spoke of resilience, of the people this night was meant to serve, the homeless, the forgotten, those who slept on concrete while men like Voss counted their billions. He painted a picture so vivid it hurt. A mother shielding her child from the rain, a veteran staring at the stars through a tattered blanket, a teenager with dreams buried under the weight of survival. The crowd leaned in, captivated, their earlier shock giving way to a renewed fire. Keanu's voice never wavered, but inside, a flicker of doubt gnawed at him. Voss's parting glare had promised retribution, and Keanu knew the tech titan's reach extended far beyond this room. Lena's pen paused as she studied Keanu's face, catching the subtle tightening of his jaw, the faint crease between his brows. She interviewed enough people to recognize the signs of a man bracing himself, a man who knew the fight wasn't over. Her mind raced with questions. What history tied Keanu to Voss? What leverage did the tech titan hold? She flipped to a fresh page, sketching a rough timeline. Fundraiser announced 3 months ago, Voss's rise in headlines, tonight's clash searching for the thread that connected them. She'd dig into Voss's past, his deals, his enemies. Something told her this wasn't random, it was personal. The room stirred as Keanu finished, his final words hanging in the air like a vow. We keep going, not because it's easy, but because it's right. The applause erupted again, louder this time, a thunderous wave that shook the chandeliers overhead. Crystal droplets trembled, casting fractured light across the walls, a shimmering dance that mirrored the crowd's fervor. Keanu stepped back, exhaling a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He caught Maria's eye and offered a small nod, a silent reassurance that steadied her trembling hands. But his own hands, hidden behind the podium, clenched into fists, his knuckles whitening as he fought the unease pooling in his gut. Beyond the windows, the city pulsed with life, oblivious to the drama unfolding within these walls. But not everyone was unaware. In the shadows of the parking lot, Damian Voss stood beside his sleek black car, his silhouette stark against the sodium glow of a street lamp. His phone pressed to his ear, his voice a low growl as he barked orders to an unseen ally. His tailored suit was rumpled now, his composure stripped away, replaced by a seething fury that radiated from him like heat. He'd underestimated Keanu, misjudged the crowd's loyalty, and it had cost him. But Voss didn't lose, not for long. He snapped the phone shut, his eyes narrowing as he stared back at the ballroom, the lights within a mocking glow against his defeat. Inside, Lena slipped her notebook into her bag, her pulse quickening as she made a decision. She'd approach Keanu, ask the questions no one else dared. She needed his side, his truth, before Voss's next move rewrote the narrative. She wove through the crowd, her steps purposeful, her mind already framing the headline. Keanu Reeves defies tech titan in $1 million showdown. But as she neared the stage, a sudden commotion stopped her cold. A sharp, metallic crash echoed from the back of the room, followed by a chorus of gasps. Heads turned, eyes wide, as a figure stumbled through the service entrance. A man in a tattered coat, his face gaunt and streaked with grime. He clutched a crumpled flyer in his hand, the same one Maria had handed out earlier, its edges worn from desperate grip. His voice rasped as he called out, not to the crowd, but to Keanu alone, his words slicing through the din. They're coming. They're shutting it down. All of it. The room froze, a collective breath held in suspense. Keanu's head snapped toward the man, his eyes narrowing as he processed the warning. Lena's hand flew to her notebook, her heart pounding with the thrill of a story breaking wide open. The man swayed, exhaustion overtaking him, but his gaze locked on Keanu, pleading, urgent. Outside, the distant wail of sirens pierced the night, growing louder, closer, a harbinger of chaos descending. Keanu stepped forward, his instincts kicking in. But before he could reach the man, the lights flickered once, twice, then plunged the ballroom into darkness. A scream ripped through the void, sharp and primal, and in that instant the fragile hope of the night shattered like glass. The world was a blur of ash and ringing silence, the kind that burrowed into your bones and made every thought feel like wading through mud. Keanu lay sprawled on the cold pavement, the taste of blood sharp on his tongue. His chest ached where the blast had punched the air from his lungs, and a dull throb pulsed at the base of his skull. Smoke coiled around him, thick and acrid, stinging his eyes as he forced them open. The alley was a war zone. Chunks of brick and twisted metal littered the ground, the air shimmering with heat from the explosion's fatting echo. Somewhere nearby, Lena's voice pierced the haze, raw and desperate. "Keanu, Keanu, get up." He rolled to his side, pain flaring through his ribs as he pushed himself upright. The alley spun for a moment, then steadied. Lena was on her knees a few feet away, her hair wild, her hands clutching the pavement as she coughed against the smoke. Beyond her, Maria's frail form slumped against the wall, untouched by the blast but still fatting, her blood pooling beneath her like spilled ink. The police were scattered, some groaning, others staggering to their feet, while the man in the suit had vanished, swallowed by the chaos as if he'd never been there. Keanu's gaze sharpened, his mind clawing through the fog. That explosion wasn't random. It was a statement, a bold stroke meant to bury them all. He stumbled to his feet, his boots crunching over shattered glass. "Lena," he rasped, his voice rough as gravel. She looked up, her eyes wide and glassy with shock, but she nodded, scrambling to stand. Keanu reached Maria first, dropping to one knee beside her. Her pulse was faint, a fragile thread beneath his fingers, but it was there. He tore a strip from his shirt, pressing it hard against her wound. "Stay with me, Maria," he murmured, his tone steady despite the storm raging inside him. Her eyelids fluttered, a weak acknowledgement, and he felt a surge of resolve. He wouldn't let her die here, not like this. Lena reached his side, her phone trembling in her hand. "Ambulance is on its way," she said, her voice tight. "But the police, they're regrouping. That officer's coming back." Keanu followed her gaze. The stern-faced cop was barking orders, his badge glinting as he directed his men to secure the alley. His eyes locked on Keanu, narrowing with suspicion. Whatever this was, Voss's machinations, a deeper conspiracy, it wasn't over. The explosion had only sharpened their focus, and Keanu was still their target. He stood, pulling Lena up with him. "We need to move," he said, his tone low and urgent. "They're not here to help us." Lena hesitated, her journalist's instinct warring with the fear etched across her face. "Move where? Keanu, what's happening? Who's doing this?" Her questions hung unanswered as he hoisted Maria into his arms, her weight light but her life heavy on his shoulders. He didn't have answers, not yet, but he knew standing still meant surrender, and that wasn't an option. The alley's far end opened into a maze of side streets, shadowed and narrow, a fleeting chance to slip away. Keanu started toward it, Lena close behind, her heels clicking a staccato rhythm against the chaos. The officer shouted something, his voice lost in the wail of approaching sirens, but Keanu didn't look back. His mind raced, piecing together fragments. The gaunt man's warning, Voss's absence yet undeniable presence, the man in the suit's chilling ultimatum. They're shutting it down. But what? The fundraiser, the shelter, or something bigger, something Keanu had stumbled into without realizing its scope. They rounded a corner, the alley's mouth spitting them into a dimly lit street lined with shuttered storefronts. The air was cooler here, the smoke thinning, but the tension clung like damp cloth. Keanu set Maria down behind a dumpster, checking her pulse again, still there, still fighting. Lena crouched beside him, her breath hitching as she scanned the shadows. "Keanu, that explosion, it wasn't just about us. It felt calculated, like a distraction." He met her gaze, her words sparking a flicker of clarity. She was right. The blast hadn't killed them. It had scattered them, shifted the board. But for what? Before he could respond, a low rumble vibrated through the pavement, a sound that wasn't sirens or traffic. It was deeper, mechanical, like the growl of something massive stirring to life. Keanu's head snapped up, his eyes tracing the street. At the far end, where the road curved into darkness, a pair of headlights flared to life, bright, unyielding, pinning them in their glare. The rumble grew into a roar as a black van screeched around the corner, its tires chewing the asphalt. Keanu's gut twisted. "You felt that, didn't you? That was no ordinary moment. If it hit you, hit like and let's keep going." This wasn't the police. This was them. The ones the gaunt man had feared, the ones Voss had unleashed. "Get down!" Keanu shoved Lena behind the dumpster, shielding Maria with his body as the van barreled toward them. Its side door slid open mid-motion, revealing shadowed figures clad in tactical gear, their faces obscured by masks. One raised a weapon, not a gun, but something sleek and unfamiliar, its barrel glinting with a cold, blue light. A sharp crack split the air and a dart whizzed past Keanu's ear, embedding itself in the dumpster with a metallic thunk. Tranquilizers. They weren't here to kill him, they wanted him alive. Keanu's mind raced, his body coiled for action. He couldn't fight them head-on, not with Maria bleeding out and Lena unarmed. But he couldn't let them take him either, not when he was this close to uncovering the truth. The van screeched to a halt, boots hitting the ground as the figures advanced. Keanu grabbed Lena's arm, his voice a fierce whisper. "Run when I move. Don't stop." She nodded, her fear swallowed by determination. He lunged up, seizing a rusted pipe from the alley's debris and hurled it with all his strength. It spun through the air, smashing into the nearest figure's chest with a sickening crunch. The man staggered and Keanu bolted, dragging Lena with him toward a narrow gap between buildings. Another dart hissed past, grazing his shoulder, but he pushed through the sting, his focus razor-sharp. The gap was tight, barely wide enough for them to slip through, but it was their only shot. They squeezed into the shadows, the sound of pursuit thundering behind them. Keanu's heart pounded, his breath ragged, but he kept moving, pulling Lena deeper into the labyrinth of brick and darkness. Maria, he'd had to leave her, a choice that clawed at him, but he'd be no good to her captured or dead. The shouts grew closer, the beam of a flashlight slicing through the gloom just as they ducked behind a stack of crates. Lena gripped his arm, her whisper trembling. "Keanu, what do they want with you?" He didn't answer, his eyes fixed on the approaching light. He didn't know, not fully, but he felt the weight of it, the threads of a conspiracy tightening around him. Voss wasn't just a wealthy tyrant, he was a puppet master, and Keanu had kicked the hornet's nest. Flashlight beams swept past, inches from their hiding spot, and then a scream not from behind but ahead. It was raw, guttural, echoing through the narrow passage. The pursuers froze, their radios crackling with static. Keanu's blood ran cold. That scream wasn't human, it was something else, something feral, something that didn't belong in this city's underbelly. The light swung wildly as the men shouted, their voices edged with panic. Then silence. A heavy, unnatural silence that pressed against Keanu's ears. He peered around the crate, the passage now empty, the flashlight lying abandoned on the ground, its beam flickering. The van's engine roared to life in the distance, tires squealing as it retreated. Whatever had screamed had scared them off. Keanu's grip tightened on Lena's arm, his mind reeling. The shadows shifted, and a low, guttural growl rumbled from the darkness ahead, a sound that promised answers or annihilation. The growl rolled through the alley like a storm breaking over the city, a deep primal sound that clawed at the edges of Keanu and Lena's nerves. It wasn't just noise, it was a warning, a presence lurking in the shadows that turned the air thick with dread. Keanu's body went rigid, every muscle poised for action, his eyes darting to pinpoint the source. Beside him, Lena pressed closer, her fingers digging into his arm, her breath coming in sharp, shallow bursts. The flashlight beams of their pursuers, Voss's armed men, had vanished, swallowed by the darkness, leaving an eerie silence in their wake. But that quiet was a lie, a thin veneer over something far worse. Keanu scanned the alley, the dim streetlight casting jagged shadows across the brick walls. Something moved, a flicker of motion, too large, too deliberate to be a trick of the eye. The air shifted, heavy with the scent of damp fur and something metallic like blood or rust. Then came a clatter, a tin can bouncing across the pavement, kicked by an unseen force. A shape loomed into view, emerging from the gloom like a nightmare taking form. It was massive, its silhouette hulking and unnatural, with long, sinewy limbs and a head that swayed as if tasting the air. Lena's hand flew to her mouth, muffling a gasp. Keanu's mind raced, connecting dots. Voss's empire, his ruthless ambition, the rumors of experiments gone horribly wrong. This thing, was it one of them? A twisted byproduct of Voss's quest for power. The creature stilled, its breath rasping in wet, guttural snorts, its eyes glinting faintly in the dark of two pinpricks of light that seemed to pierce straight through them. Keanu's heart thudded against his ribs. For a fleeting moment, he thought it might lumber past, uninterested in two more prey in a city full of shadows. But then its head snapped up, those glowing eyes fixing on them, and a growl rumbled from its chest, low and lethal. Time fractured into seconds. Keanu seized Lena's wrist, his grip iron-tight, and yanked her into motion. Their boots pounded the pavement, the sound swallowed by the creature's sudden roar, a bellow that shook the alley's walls and spurred them faster. They sprinted through the twisting maze of the alley, debris crunching underfoot. The beasts pursued a thunderous cacophony of crashing metal and splintering wood. Keanu's lungs burned, his focus narrowing to survival. Keep moving, keep Lena safe. The alley bent sharply, and there, half buried under a stack of broken crates, a manhole cover gleamed, its edge pried open just enough to reveal a black void below. It was a desperate chance, a plunge into uncertainty, but the alternative was the creature's claws. Keanu skidded to a halt, wrenching the cover aside with a grunt of effort, the metal scraping loudly against the stone. Lena didn't hesitate. She dropped into the hole, her hands grasping the ladder's rungs, disappearing into the dark. Above, the creature's shadow swelled, its roar deafening as it lunged. Keanu swung himself into the manhole just as its claws raked the pavement, sparks flying where he'd stood moments before. He descended fast, the ladder slick with moisture, the air turning cold and fetid as he sank deeper. The creature's snarls echoed overhead, furious but distant. It didn't follow. Perhaps the tunnel was too narrow, or it feared what lay below. Keanu's boots hit solid ground, and he found himself in a cramped tunnel, the walls glistening with damp, lit only by the faint red glow of emergency lights. Lena stood beside him, her chest heaving, her face pale but fierce. The terror of the chase lingered in her wide eyes, but her jaw was set, her resolve unbroken. Keanu glanced up at the manhole, the circle of night sky still clear. They'd escaped the creature for now, but this wasn't a sewer. A low hum vibrated through the walls, mechanical and steady, hinting at something hidden, something deliberate. Voss's secrets didn't end at the surface. They burrowed deeper. Lena seemed to sense it too, her journalist's instincts flaring. She nodded down the tunnel, her movements purposeful despite the tremor in her hands. Keanu agreed silently. They had to know what Voss was hiding. They crept forward, the tunnel winding like a vein beneath the city, its air thick with the stench of rot and oil. Strange markings scarred the walls, arrows, numbers, cryptic symbols that spoke of a purpose Keanu couldn't decipher. The hum grew louder, the temperature dropping, until they reached a rusted metal door blocking their path. A keypad glowed beside it, its screen demanding a code. Lena frowned, her fingers hovering over the buttons, but Keanu's mind flashed to the torn pamphlet Maria had clutched earlier, numbers scrawled in its margin. 9274. A hunch, but all they had. He punched it in, the keypad chirping softly. With a groan, the door slid open, revealing a sight that stole the breath from their lungs. The chamber beyond was vast, its ceiling lost in shadow, its walls lined with glass tanks glowing with a sickly green light. Inside each tank floated a figure, human once, now grotesque, their bodies warped into something monstrous. Elongated limbs twisted unnaturally, faces frozen in silent agony, tubes and wires threading through their flesh to machines that hummed with cold efficiency. Lena staggered back, a choked sound escaping her throat. Keanu's stomach roiled, disgust and fury warring within him. This was Voss's work. His ambition turned to horror, his experiments birthing abominations. The creature above wasn't an accident. It was a piece of this nightmare, a living weapon set loose. He approached a tank, the glass cool under his palm, the figure inside twitching as if sensing him. Its eyes opened, milky, pleading, and Keanu recoiled, his resolve hardening into steel. Lena was already moving, her phone out, snapping photos with shaking hands. The evidence was here, undeniable, a story that could shatter Voss's empire. But their discovery was cut short by a new sound, footsteps, crisp and deliberate, echoing from the tunnel. Keanu grabbed Lena, pulling her behind a bank of machinery, their bodies pressed tight in the shadows. Two men entered, their outlines stark against the green glow. One was tall, his posture commanding, his voice a low growl. The other was smaller, twitchy, his hands wringing nervously. "Wipe it clean," the taller one said. "Voss wants no trace left. Reeves is too close." Keanu's blood chilled. They knew he was hunting them. The smaller man hesitated. "The subject some could still—" "No," the taller snapped. "Burn it all, tonight." They moved deeper into the chamber, oblivious to the intruders crouched nearby. Keanu signaled Lena and they slipped toward the door, every step a gamble. Just as they reached it, an alarm screamed to life, red lights flashing, bathing the room in blood-hued chaos. The men whirled, spotting them. "There," one barked, drawing a gun. Keanu slammed the door shut, jamming a pipe into the handle as bullets thudded against the metal. They ran, the tunnel trembling as machinery roared to life. Voss was destroying it all, erasing his crimes in a fiery grave. They reached the ladder, but the creature loomed above, its eyes gleaming with feral intent. Keanu froze, Lena gripping his arm. Then the creature stepped aside, revealing the open manhole. A trap, a mercy. No time to decide. The chamber doors buckled behind them, men shouting. Keanu pushed Lena up, following close, the creature's gaze heavy on his back. They burst into the night as the ground erupted below, the tunnel collapsing in a storm of dust and flame. Gasping, they stumbled onto the street, the creature lost to the inferno. Lena clutched her phone, proof of Voss's atrocities, her face fierce with purpose. But a new shadow emerged, a police officer, his badge glinting, his tone smooth as he said, "Keanu Reeves, you're under arrest." His eyes betrayed him, Voss's puppet. Before Keanu could react, a van screeched to a halt, Maria at the wheel, battered but alive. "Get in," she yelled. They dove inside, tires squealing as they fled, the officers' curses fading into the night. The fight wasn't over. Voss's reach was vast, but so was Keanu's resolve. The rooftop was a jagged island in the night, hemmed in by the city's glowing sprawl. Keanu stood frozen, the barrel of the suited man's gun a dark eye staring him down. The wind whipped across the gravel, tugging at his coat, but his gaze was locked on the enforcer's cold smile, a predator savoring the kill. Lena pressed herself against the low wall, her breath shallow, her mind racing for an escape that didn't exist. Jax knelt beside her, the laptop clutched to his chest, his face a mask of guilt and terror. The USB drive, their fragile hope against Voss, dangled from its port like a lifeline about to snap. The man in the suit tilted his head, his voice smooth as silk over steel. "You've caused quite a mess, Mr. Reeves, but I'm here to clean it up." Keanu's fists tight, his body coiled despite the gun's threat. He could feel the weight of Jax's betrayal like a stone in his gut, but there was no time to unravel it, not with death standing 5 feet away. "You're Voss's lapdog," he growled, his voice steady despite the odds. "What's he paying you to silence the truth?" The man's smile widened, a flash of teeth in the moonlight. "Truth's a luxury you can't afford anymore. The city's already turning against you. By morning, you'll be a ghost story, another madman who couldn't handle the pressure." Lena's eyes darted to Keanu, then to the enforcer, her journalist instincts kicking in. "You can't bury this," she snapped, her voice cutting through the tension. "The leaks are out, people are asking questions. Voss's empire is cracking and you know it." The man's gaze flicked to her, his expression darkening. "Whispers on the internet won't save you, Ms. Carter. Voss owns the narrative, always has." He adjusted his grip on the gun, his finger brushing the trigger. "Now hand over the drive, and maybe I'll make this quick." Jax flinched, his hands trembling as he clutched the laptop tighter. I can't," he stammered, his voice breaking. "He has my sister if I don't." The enforcer's eyes narrowed, a flicker of impatience breaking his calm. "Your sister's a lost cause, kid. You should have thought of that before you played hero." Keanu seized the moment, stepping forward, his voice low and fierce. "Let her go, Jax. You don't have to be his pawn." Jax's head snapped up, his eyes wide with desperation. "You don't understand. He'll kill her." Standoff stretched taut, seconds ticking by in the howling wind. Then from the alley below, a clamor rose, shouts, the clatter of metal, the roar of defiance. Keanu risked a glance over the edge. Maria's ragged army of the homeless surged against Voss's men, their makeshift weapons flashing in the streetlights. The scarred man led the charge, a pipe swinging in his hands, driving the suited enforcers back up into chaos. Hope flared in Keanu's chest, but it was short-lived. The man in the suit chuckled, unfazed. "Your little rebellion's cute, won't change a thing." Before Keanu could react, the enforcer swung the gun toward Lena, his finger tightening. Instinct took over. Keanu lunged, slamming into the man with the force of a freight train. The shot cracked through the night, wild and off-target, punching into the rooftop's edge. They hit the gravel hard, a tangle of limbs and fury. The gun skittered free, spinning toward the wall. Lena dove for it, her hands shaking as she scooped it up, aiming it at the enforcer with unsteady resolve. "Stay down," she shouted, her voice raw. Keanu pinned the man beneath him, his knee grinding into the enforcer's chest. Blood trickled from the man's lip, but his smirk didn't fade. "You're too late," he rasped. "Voss knows where you are. This rooftop's your grave." Keanu's fist tightened, ready to strike, but a sharp cry from Jax stopped him cold. "He's not lying," Jax yelled, scrambling to his feet, the laptop slipping from his grasp. I tagged the drive. It's a beacon. They've been tracking us since I plugged it in." Lena's face drained of color, the gun wavering in her hands. "You led them here." Her voice was a whisper, disbelief warring with rage. Keanu released the enforcer, shoving him back as he stood, his mind racing. The USB drive blinked faintly, a tiny red light pulsing like a heartbeat. A trap. Jax sank to his knees, tears streaking his face. "I didn't want this. I thought I could save her." The distant whine of helicopter blades cut through the night, growing louder, closer. Searchlights swept the skyline, homing in on their position. Keanu grabbed the laptop, yanking the drive free and hurling it toward the rooftop's edge. It clattered against the gravel, but the damage was done. Voss's forces were converging, their net tightening. The enforcer laughed, a wet, guttural sound. "Run all you want. There's nowhere left to hide." Lena lowered the gun, her eyes meeting Keanu's. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice trembling but defiant. Keanu scanned the rooftop, fire escape blocked, door compromised, the edge a sheer drop to the chaos below. The helicopter's roar was deafening now, its light blinding as it crested the building. Maria's people were fighting, buying them time, but it wouldn't last. He grabbed Lena's arm, pulling her toward the wall. "We jump," he said, his tone leaving no room for doubt. "Into the fight. It's our only shot." Jack staggered to his feet, his face ashen. "I'm sorry, I'll make this right." Before Keanu could stop him, Jax bolted toward the enforcer, tackling him with a desperate cry. They crashed against the wall, grappling as the helicopter's downdraft whipped the air into a frenzy. Keanu didn't wait. He seized Lena's hand, and they ran for the edge. The searchlight caught them mid-stride, bathing them in white as they leapt into the void. The fall was a heartbeat, the ground rushing up to meet them. They landed hard in a pile of trash bags, pain exploding through Keanu's legs, but he rolled to his feet, dragging Lena with him. The alley was a war zone, Maria's fighters clashing with Voss's men, blood and shouts staining the night. Above, the helicopter pivoted, its light hunting them anew. Keanu spotted Maria, her face streaked with dirt and determination, swinging a chain at an attacker. She saw them, her eyes lighting with relief, and pointed toward a storm drain. "Go, we'll hold them off." They sprinted for the drain, the sounds of pursuit closing in. Lena stumbled, but Keanu caught her, his arm around her waist as they reached the rusted grate. He yanked it open, shoving her inside before following, the darkness swallowing them whole. The tunnel echoed with their ragged breaths, the clamor of the fight muffled above. They crawled through the muck, driven by adrenaline and the faint hope of survival. Behind them, the helicopter's roar faded, replaced by a new sound, a low, guttural growl reverberating through the tunnel. Keanu froze, his blood icing over. He turned, his eyes straining in the gloom. At the tunnel's mouth, silhouetted against the faint light, stood a hulking shape, too large, too twisted to be human. One of Voss's creatures, unleashed to finish the hunt. Its eyes glowed red, locking onto them, and it charged. The storm drain was a suffocating maze of darkness, its damp walls closing in as Keanu and Lena faced the monstrous creature stalking them. The air hung heavy with the reek of rot and the sharp edge of fear. Keanu's back pressed against the cold concrete, his breaths quick and controlled, his eyes tracking the beast's lumbering form. Its guttural growl echoed, a sound that gnawed at their resolve. Lena crouched beside him, her hand tight on his arm, her face a mask of determination despite the terror in her eyes. They were cornered, weaponless, trapped, but Keanu wasn't ready to give up. His gaze darted around the tunnel, searching for anything they could use. Then he saw it, a rusted valve protruding from the wall, its wheel crusted with age, connected to a network of pipes overhead. Water dripped steadily from the joints, a faint hiss hinting at pressure within. A plan clicked into place. He nudged Lena, pointing subtly. "When I say go, turn that valve all the way." She nodded, trusting him without hesitation. Keanu shifted, his boots scraping faintly as he braced himself. The creature sensed the movement, its head snapping toward them, and with a bone-rattling roar it charged. "Go," Keanu barked. Lena sprang to the valve, twisting it with every ounce of strength she had. A piercing hiss erupted as steam blasted from the pipes, a scalding cloud that filled the tunnel. The creature screeched, rearing back as the heat scorched its grotesque flesh. Keanu seized Lena's hand, yanking her past the flailing beast. They ran, the steam stinging their skin, the creature's agonized cries fading as they found a ladder leading up. Keanu shoved the manhole cover aside, and they burst into the night air, lungs burning, hearts pounding. The city above was alive with chaos. Maria and her band of homeless fighters clashed with Voss's enforcers in the streets, their shouts of defiance ringing out amid the gunfire. Keanu spotted a familiar scarred man swinging a crowbar, holding his ground against a towering thug. But Voss's men were relentless, their numbers and firepower overwhelming Maria's scrappy resistance. The fight was slipping away, until a new sound rose, raw and unstoppable, swelling from every corner of the city. Keanu turned, his breath catching. People poured from the shadows, ordinary citizens, armed with pipes, bricks, anything they could wield. Shopkeepers, workers, kids barely old enough to understand the stakes. They came as one, their voices a thunderous wave of rage and hope. The leaks, the evidence of Voss's crimes, had spread like wildfire, igniting a rebellion. The city had awakened, and it was tearing Voss's empire apart from the roots. Lena's phone buzzed, snapping her from the sight. She glanced at the screen, her eyes widening. It's Jax. He's alive inside Voss's tower, hacking the system. Relief and urgency surged through Keanu. Jax, the young hacker who betrayed them under duress, had survived the rooftop. "Tell him to push it all out," Keanu said. "Every file, every secret, let the world see." Lena typed furiously, her message sent in seconds. But the heart of the fight remained untouched. Damian Voss, the architect of this nightmare, still loomed over them from his high-rise fortress. Keanu met Lena's gaze, his voice firm. "I'm going after him. You stay, help Maria hold the line." She grabbed his arm, fierce and unyielding. "No, we end this together." He didn't argue, there was no time. They wove through the chaos, dodging bullets and bodies, until they reached the gleaming tower that housed Voss's throne. Inside, the building was a stark contrast to the war outside. Silent, pristine, its marble floors and towering windows a monument to Voss's arrogance. They took the elevator to the penthouse, the ride a tense eternity. When the doors slid open, they stepped into a scene of cold luxury. Damian Voss sat behind a sprawling desk, his sharp features lit by a bank of screens, his demeanor unnervingly calm. "You're persistent, Reeves," Voss said, not bothering to stand. "But futile. My systems are purging the data as we speak. You've won nothing." Keanu advanced, his steps deliberate. "The city's fighting back. Your monsters, your lies, they're all out there for everyone to see." Voss smirked, unfazed. "The rabble, they'll tire. Power isn't truth, it's control." Lena stepped forward, her voice cutting like a blade. "Not anymore. Jax is in your network. He's dumping everything, your deals, your experiments. It's live, Voss, you're finished." A shadow of uncertainty crossed his face. He tapped a screen, his calm fracturing as the displays flickered, then flooded with damning evidence. Financial trails, videos of the creatures, every sin laid bare. Jax had done it. The world was watching. Voss's mask shattered. He slammed a fist on his desk, triggering a hidden panel. "If I go down, you're coming with me." The room trembled as panels in the walls slid open, releasing more of his twisted creations, snarling beasts with eyes like burning coals. Keanu pushed Lena behind him, ready to fight, when a deafening crash split the air. The penthouse windows shattered, glass raining down as a helicopter roared into view, its spotlight searing the room. Maria clung to the chopper's side, her face etched with resolve, the scarred man at the controls. She threw a rope through the broken window. "Move," she shouted. Keanu shoved Lena toward it, turning to fend off the creatures. Claws raked his arm, blood welling, but he fought back, driving them away with raw fury. Lena secured the rope, and Keanu followed, hauling himself up as the beasts lunged. They climbed into the helicopter, the scarred man pulling them skyward. Voss staggered up, his voice a snarl of defiance. "This isn't over. I'll rise again." His words choked off as the creatures turned, their loyalty broken by the hack. They closed in, their growls drowning his screams as the helicopter soared away, leaving him to his fate. The city stretched out below, its streets aglow with defiance and dawn's first light. The people cheered, their victory echoing through the night. Voss's empire lay in ruins, his secrets exposed, his reign ended. Keanu sank into the helicopter's seat, exhaustion washing over him. Lena rested against him, her presence a quiet anchor. Maria gripped his hand, her voice soft but strong. "We did it, together." As they flew over the waking city, Keanu's eyes traced the horizon, where sunlight pierced the shadows. The battle was won, but he knew the struggle for justice was endless. New threats would come, new fights would rise. Yet for now, the city breathed free, its spirit unbroken. He let a faint smile touch his lips, closing his eyes as the dawn broke. They'd sparked a flame that wouldn't fade, and whatever tomorrow held, he'd face it when it came. If you enjoyed this story, there's another video on screen right now. Go ahead and give it a look for an even more astonishing tale. And don't forget, we'll have many more uplifting and dramatic stories coming your way. So make sure you subscribe to our channel, that way you'll never miss our newest uploads.